The highway stretched endlessly under the scorching afternoon sun as cars zipped past the dusty roadside diner called Highway Spoon Grill. It was the kind of place truckers loved, families ignored, and strangers visited only once. But on this particular day, someone walked in who was anything but ordinary. Steven Seagal. He was traveling alone, wearing a simple black jacket, dark pants, and sunglasses that hid the calmness of his eyes. He needed nothing more than a quiet meal and a little rest. He pushed the diner door open gently. A small bell jingled, and a few customers turned their heads for a split second, then went back to their food. No one recognized him yet. Steven chose a booth near the corner, far from the chatter. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Linda, walked over with a tired smile. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked. "A cup of hot tea," Steven replied in his calm, deep voice. "And the special?" Linda nodded. "Coming right up." For a few minutes, everything was peaceful. Steven sipped his tea slowly, feeling the warmth travel through his body. He enjoyed moments like this, simple, quiet, human, but that peace was about to be shattered. The diner door flew open. 3 police officers walked in, 2 men and 1 woman. Their uniforms were dusty, their belts full of jingling gear, and their attitudes heavy with arrogance. It was obvious they were used to throwing their weight around, especially in small towns like this. Officer Rick, the tallest, scanned the diner with a smirk. "Looks like we got ourselves a full house today." Officer Blake cracked his gum loudly. "Yeah, and some out-of-towners too." Officer Jenna crossed her arms. "Let's grab a table." But instead of choosing an empty one, they walked straight toward Steven's booth. Rick looked down at Steven, not recognizing him at all, only noticing that he looked calm and quiet. Too calm for Rick's liking. "You're sitting in our booth," Rick said sharply. Steven looked up slowly, removing his sunglasses with a controlled motion. His eyes were calm, almost serene. "This seat wasn't marked," he replied softly. "There are plenty of others." Rick leaned forward. "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said this is our booth." Steven paused for a moment, studying the man, not with fear but with understanding. Then he nodded and began to move slightly in his seat, but Linda appeared beside them before Steven could stand. "Rick, leave him alone," she said firmly. "He was here first." Blake scoffed. "We don't need your opinion, Linda." Jenna smirked. "Yeah, we outrank you here." Linda folded her arms. "This restaurant belongs to my family. You don't outrank anyone in here." Rick ignored her completely and pounded the table with his fist. "Get up," he ordered Steven again. A few customers turned to watch. Things were heating up. Steven sighed slowly. He didn't want conflict. But these officers were clearly looking for trouble. "I'm just trying to enjoy my meal," he said quietly. "I'm not looking for problems." "Too bad," Blake snapped. "You just found some." Steven stayed seated. His silence made Rick angrier. "You think you're tough, old man," Rick taunted. "You think the rules don't apply to you." Steven looked up at them again. "I've lived long enough to know which rules matter," he replied. That sentence hit Rick the wrong way. Blake stepped closer, puffing out his chest. "Oh, he's a philosopher, look at that." Jenna added, "Or a hippie who wandered into the wrong diner." Linda slammed Steven's plate onto the table, furious. "That's enough." But the officers ignored her again. Then Blake reached forward and grabbed Steven's shoulder. The diner fell silent. Steven didn't move at first. Then, like a slow wave of controlled motion, he placed his hand on Blake's wrist. Not roughly, not aggressively, but calmly. "Take your hand off me," Steven said in a voice so low it gave Blake chills. Blake yanked his hand back, confused by how effortlessly Steven had stopped him. But embarrassment turned to fury instantly. "What the hell, who do you think you are?" Steven didn't answer. He simply resumed sipping his tea. Rick grabbed the front of Steven's jacket and pulled him halfway out of the booth. "You wanna play games with the police?" Rick growled. "Let's see your ID." Steven remained calm. "My wallet is in my coat pocket." "Then hand it over." Steven reached slowly into his coat and pulled out his wallet. Rick snatched it from his hand before he could say anything. Rick opened it and froze, his eyes widened slightly. He didn't understand everything he was seeing, but he saw enough to know this man wasn't ordinary. There were special clearances, badges, and certifications that were far above local police authority. But instead of backing off, Rick got angrier. He didn't like feeling intimidated. He didn't like not being in control. He stuffed the wallet into his pocket. Jenna blinked. "Rick, what are you doing? Just watch," he said. Linda stepped forward, pointing at Rick. "You give that back right now." Rick smirked. "Relax, it's evidence now." "Evidence for what?" Steven asked calmly. For resisting officers, Rick said with a grin. You haven't done anything worth charging, Steven replied. Blake snapped. We'll decide what you're charged with. A few customers were quietly recording now. Phones were out. People were whispering, but the officers were too deep in their egos to notice. Jenna crossed her arms, suddenly unsure. Rick, maybe we should know. Rick barked. He wants to act tough, then he can deal with the consequences. He pointed at Steven. Stand up, you're coming with us. Steven slowly placed his teacup down. The room felt heavy, like the air itself knew something was about to happen. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. Rick grabbed his baton. Blake pulled out his cuffs. Jenna stepped backward, sensing danger, but Steven didn't move. Instead, he spoke in a calm voice that cut through the tension like a blade. I'm going to ask you one last time. Give me back my wallet. Rick laughed. Make me. Steven stood, not fast, not aggressively, but with a kind of controlled precision that made the entire diner hold its breath. Rick swung his baton, but Steven wasn't there. He shifted slightly to the side, letting Rick's strike pass harmlessly, then gently redirected Rick's arm. The baton clattered onto a table. Blake rushed at Steven, swinging wildly. Steven simply guided Blake's momentum, twisting his wrist and sending him stumbling into a chair. Jenna reached for her pepper spray, but Steven raised a single hand. I wouldn't do that. His voice wasn't angry. It was a warning, a calm final warning. Jenna froze. Rick roared and charged again. Steven moved once more, precise, smooth, effortless. He stepped aside, grabbed Rick's wrist, and flipped him onto the floor with minimal force. The entire diner erupted in gasps in seconds. The three officers were disarmed, confused, and humiliated. Rick groaned on the floor. What are you? Steven crouched next to him. I'm someone who gave you more chances than you deserved. Rick looked terrified now. Your wallet, he whispered, reaching into his own pocket and handing it over. Steven took it back calmly. Linda stepped forward, relieved but still nervous. But Steven wasn't done speaking. He stood tall and looked at each officer. You abused your power today. You bullied a stranger for no reason, and you did it in front of people who trusted you. Rick swallowed hard. Blake rubbed his wrist. Jenna looked down, embarrassed. Steven put his sunglasses back on. This isn't over, he said quietly. You're going to answer for this. He turned toward the door, but right before leaving, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The diner door opened, and someone stepped inside who froze the officers in shock. Someone they definitely did not expect. Someone who recognized Steven instantly, and someone who was about to change the entire story. The diner door swung open with a heavy thud as the black SUV parked outside stopped rumbling. Dust from the parking lot drifted in, and the entire restaurant turned to see who had just entered. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark tactical uniform walked in. His badge gleamed under the yellow lights. His presence instantly shifted the energy in the room. Authority radiated off him like heat. Chief Harrison, the county's most respected law enforcement officer, a man known for his discipline, fairness, and zero tolerance for misconduct. The three cops on the floor froze the moment they recognized him. Rick's face went pale. Blake's hands trembled. Jenna whispered under her breath, "Oh no." Chief Harrison scanned the scene in front of him. Rick on the floor, Blake rubbing his wrist in pain, Jenna looking like she wanted to disappear, customers whispering, and in the middle of it all stood Steven Seagal, calm and still sipping the last of his tea. The chief blinked once, then twice, then his eyes widened with recognition. "Steven," he said, stunned. Steven nodded politely. "Hello, Chief." The diner exploded with whispers. Phones lifted higher. People realized at that moment who the quiet stranger in the booth truly was. Steven Seagal, world-famous martial artist, trainer of law enforcement and military units, a man whose skills were legendary and whose calmness could silence storms. But the only people who didn't realize this earlier were the three cops who had tried to bully him. Chief Harrison stared at them with shock and disgust. "What did you three do?" he barked. Rick scrambled to his feet, trying to fix his uniform. "Chief, sir, he attacked us." Blake nodded rapidly. "Yeah, we were asking for his ID and he resisted. He assaulted officers." Jenna looked at them in disbelief. "Are you too serious? That's not what happened." "Quiet," Rick snapped at her. But Chief Harrison had already seen everything he needed to see. The scattered chairs, the baton lying on the floor, the terrified customers, and the videos being recorded. He turned sharply to the room and asked, "Did anyone record what happened?" Dozens of hands shot up instantly. Rick's heart sank. Blake's jaw dropped. Jenna closed her eyes, ashamed. Chief Harrison sighed. A long, heavy sigh that carried disappointment, anger, and exhaustion. "Give me one phone," he said. A trucker handed him his phone with the recording already open. The chief pressed play. The entire diner held its breath. The video showed everything. Rick bullying Steven, grabbing his jacket, stealing his wallet. Blake trying to restrain him without cause. The aggressive behavior, the threats, the abuses of power. And finally, Steven defending himself with minimal force, calm precision, and absolute restraint. Chief Harrison watched the video twice. Then he slowly lowered the phone. His expression turned ice cold. He stepped toward Rick. "You bullied a civilian, you assaulted him, you stole his property, you escalated the situation, you endangered the public, and worst of all, you did all of that to one of the greatest martial arts and law enforcement instructors alive." Rick stuttered. "Chief, I didn't know. That's exactly the problem." Harrison snapped. "You didn't know, you didn't care, and you acted like a thug wearing a badge." Blake stepped back. "Chief, I swear, you two," the chief said, pointing at him. "You acted like a coward trying to show off." Jenna looked down, tears forming. "Chief, I tried to stop them." Harrison softened slightly. "I know, I saw you hesitate, but you didn't stop them soon enough." Jenna nodded quietly. She knew he was right. Chief Harrison turned to Steven. "Sir, I'm deeply sorry for what happened." Steven shook his head gently. "It's not your fault, Chief." "Maybe not," the chief replied, "but it is my responsibility." He turned back to the three officers. "Badge, now." Rick gasped. "Chief, no. You can't, badge." Harrison roared. Rick, shaking, removed his badge with trembling fingers. Blake did the same. Jenna hesitated, but eventually handed hers over too. Chief Harrison collected all three badges and placed them on a table. "You're suspended, indefinitely. Internal Affairs will handle the rest." Rick tried one last time. "Chief, please. I have a family." Steven stepped forward. Everyone went silent. He looked Rick in the eyes. "You should have thought about your family before you abused your authority." Rick broke. Tears fell down his face, not because Steven said it harshly, but because he said it truthfully. Blake collapsed into a chair, stunned. Jenna stood still, silent and ashamed. Chief Harrison sighed again and turned to Steven. "Let me handle this mess. Can I offer you anything? Protection? Escort? Anything?" Steven smiled softly. "Chief, I just wanted a cup of tea and a quiet meal." The chief nodded sadly. "I'm sorry you didn't get that." Linda stepped forward. "I'll bring you a fresh meal on the house," she said warmly. Steven smiled. "Thank you, Linda." As Linda walked toward the kitchen, the chief sat across from Steven. "You know, I trained under some of your instructors back in the day," he said. Steven nodded. "I could tell by your posture." The chief chuckled. "Still sharp as ever." But then his face turned serious. "Steven, this isn't the first time those three have caused trouble. Complaints, reports, bad behavior, but today, they crossed a line." Steven responded quietly. "Sometimes people need consequences to learn." The chief nodded. "And sometimes they need someone like you to teach them." The diner slowly returned to normal. Customers whispered in excitement. Some thanked Steven. Some shook his hand. Others simply stared in disbelief. But the three officers, they sat on a bench outside, waiting for the transport vehicle, their careers hanging by a thread. Rick finally spoke. "I messed up," he whispered. Jenna nodded. "We all did." Blake looked at the ground. "We deserved everything," he said. Rick wiped his eyes. "But who is he, really?" Jenna answered softly. "He's Steven Seagal, and we're lucky he showed mercy." Inside, Steven finished his meal calmly. When he stood up to leave, the entire diner watched him silently. He paid for his food, even though Linda insisted it should be free, and left a generous tip. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside Chief Harrison. "Take care of them, Chief," Steven said. "Discipline is important, but so is guidance." The chief nodded. "I'll try, but I'm not sure they deserve another chance." Steven replied calmly. "People rarely deserve mercy, but they need it." Then he stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the parking lot. Rick, Blake, and Jenna stood up as Steven passed. None spoke. None defended themselves. None even looked up. But as Steven walked by, Rick managed to whisper, "I'm sorry." Steven didn't stop walking, but he answered, "Be better." And with that, he opened the door of his vehicle, sat inside, and drove off into the fading sunlight, leaving behind a diner full of people who would talk about this moment for years. Chief Harrison watched from the doorway. He whispered to himself, still teaching lessons, even after all these years. And somewhere down the highway, Steven Seagal continued his journey. quietly, calmly, powerfully, never asking for respect, yet earning it everywhere he went.